Okay, I think we'll begin. There are snacks for later. Unless anyone desperately needs snacks, you can run outside and get some snacks. But they'll be set up outside for when we're done. But these are some sources that I really enjoy, and I'd like to sort of want to discuss with you. Okay, so the opening quote that I kind of have before even the numbered quotes. This is from an essay that Professor Chaim Soloveitchik, was a historian of medieval Jewish history. He wrote, sort of a side comment he makes, sort of in his writings. He makes it sort of often like these side comments, which I find very striking. He writes, "From studying a legal or even a theological system, one can rarely, if ever, get at the experiential core of a religion. One can be conversant with the entire literature of the church fathers and the dogmas of Christianity, and little know how irrelevant God the Father has been to the lived Christianity of the past millennium, and how central has been the Virgin Mary." I don't really know. But one can master the entire Shulchan Aruch in all its multi-volume complexity and never have an inkling of the centrality of Talmud Torah in Judaism. So that's sort of our opening, that's the opening question, right? It's that Torah study is central to Judaism in a way that you wouldn't necessarily know from reading Jewish texts, right? You wouldn't understand, you wouldn't realize that for centuries this has been something really kind of unique to Judaism. And I guess that's maybe the framing of this 4-part series, 4 radical Jewish ideas. I'm trying to identify 4 ideas that are either unique to Judaism or that were innovated by Judaism and that are really different from other things that existed, in the ancient world before Judaism arose, or that even exist now. And I think the centrality of Torah study as a religious act, as an intellectual act, beyond, I think is really different from what you find in other religions. I don't know intimately what other religions are like. I don't have the sense that studying religious texts as a devotional act, as an organizing framework of a community exists in other faiths. One sort of interesting example of this, I think it's this might be an example. Maybe it's an example of something else, but I think it's when we worked on campus every year at the beginning of the year, I did like a presentation called Introduction to Halachic Life on Campus. And at first it was like a lecture, but then after a year or two, I stopped doing it as a lecture, and it was just Q&A. And that was sort of, I said a few things, 5 minutes at the beginning, and the students, mezuzah in my dorm room with a non-Jewish roommate, or can I, ask my, I have a roommate who is religious and he wants to turn the lights on Shabbat, all those types of questions. And they came up with the question themselves and just responded. And one year, the Muslim chaplain came as well. Somebody invited him, or I was friendly with him, whatever it was, he decided to come, and I was happy to have him come. And he said the type of legal analysis that I was doing, the questions that I was responding to. He's even though Islam has a legal tradition, it's in some ways a very similar religion to Judaism in that they have mitzvot, they have halacha, but that sort of that any cleric, any clergy member would be able to have that kind of conversation with members of the community who would be have that facility in discussing legal questions with that vocabulary. That was really foreign to Islam, where these types where can I do this, can I not do this? You would ask those questions, but the decisions would be made by a really smaller cadre of scholars, and the community as a whole wouldn't be conversant in the kind of a vocabulary of that I was, in Hilchot Shabbat, there's a concept, adopted or not. You can't ask a Gentile to do something for you on Shabbat that you can't do yourself, but if the Gentile is doing it for their own benefit, for their own convenience, you can ask them to do something if you could do it yourself. So you could ask, since you can, as an example, you can, it's important to know anyway, you can do dishes on Shabbat using cold water and, without using a sponge that you squeeze. There's a Shabbat-compliant way to wash dishes on Shabbat. Therefore, it's permissible to ask a Gentile to wash dishes on your behalf. And if that Gentile chooses to do it in a way that's convenient for them with hot water or in the dishwasher, that's a dietary nashe. They're not doing it because you didn't ask them to use the dishwasher. They're doing that because that's more convenient for them. It's their own benefit and their own intention to do that. You're not asking them, that's fine. Because since there is a way to, so I don't know, that's something I always discuss with the students. I always discuss with the students because it comes up in many, many sort of areas of halachic life, especially on campus. And I think that was an example of that conversation. So I think that comes also from Talmud Torah. That's not just what do I need to know? I could read a code book to know just to learn how to do it. A handbook could tell me what to do. But that there's an effort to a community to become educated in a sort of more sophisticated discourse about the practice of religion. And obviously halacha is one area, but also in Chumash and Parshanut and philosophy and other areas of Torah scholarship as well. So that's the framework. Any sort of reactions to that so far before we plow in? Yes?
I have a question. What's the date of the book, of Chaim Soloveitchik's book? You know?
He said this in an article that he published several years ago. The book came out. It was 800 years since Maimonides' birth or death. So it was whatever you can do. I forget when it was. It was within the last 10 years. This article was published. It's a great article actually. It's about the polemic and art of the Mishnah Torah. It's great. This is not what it's about. This is just an aside comment he makes. Okay, so Maimonides writes, every man in Israel is obligated to study Torah, whether rich or poor, healthy or seriously ill, whether young or old and weak. Even a poor person who is supported through tzedakah, knocks on doors, meaning begs for money. Even someone married with children must set time for study Torah day and night, as it says in Joshua. This was our Haftarah just last week. You shall meditate upon it day and night. Okay, so there you have an obligation. Okay, there's an obligation for each individual to set aside time for Torah study. And again, this seems to be, what do we notice about this? So, okay, what do we notice about this? What does this include? What's included in this obligation? What's it about? What isn't it about?
What you should study.
It doesn't say what you should study. For example?
Chumash, Navi, Halacha.
Right. And what would be the implication? Could you just play that forward? What would be the implications if it was limited in one way or the other? Let's say, I don't want to.
I can think of a bunch of things.
Sure.
Some people there might be a barrier to entry in some areas.
Oh, interesting.
Study,
Right. So maybe so the obligation is only Talmud, and that requires that requires a certain amount of training to understand the vocabulary, or a certain intellectual sophistication to understand it. So maybe then not everyone could do it. This seems to be a blanket obligation for everyone. So maybe the subject matter would be more open. Good.
In Torah. That seems like if he's not defining category, maybe it can be a broader.
Oh, even broader than what we would think of as Torah. Maybe it would include, for example, Aristotle. Right. Oh, maybe. Good. So for Maimonides, maybe it would. Right. Maybe. Right. If the purpose is not, if it's not limited to halacha, if it's not study what you have to do to be a good Jew, if it's more broad than that, study divine wisdom, then maybe Aristotle would be included for Maimonides, who certainly thought so. Yeah.
Who's included in man?
Who's included as man? So for Maimonides, man is man. And elsewhere he does explicitly include women in a different angle, for a different facet. He explicitly includes women in Torah study. But I think for this basic obligation, definitely for Maimonides he means man, and definitely that needs to be unpacked and examined. Although that's not my main focus tonight, but but maybe we'll come back to it. We should come back to it. It's definitely important. Yeah.
By not specifying what is or isn't required, where something might just be meritorious to study, we now don't have people being experts in just one body of work, as opposed to some advanced scholars just happen to know this because it's part of the collection of canon.
Not quite sure. Understand what you're saying? Could you say?
So because it's not saying we only have to study Talmud.
Mm-hmm.
We have people studying Chumash.
Oh, I see. Right. That's really nice. Everyone, and that's something that I have one of my it's yeshiva for post high school boys in Jerusalem called Eretz Tzvi. And when it was one of the founders of the yeshiva was one of my teachers prior to that, and he told me that one of the goals of establishing a curriculum was to have a diverse curriculum. It wouldn't be so Talmud-centric like most boys yeshivot are, because he wanted these guys, when they go to college, if all they do in yeshiva is 8 hours a day, 8-hour blocks of Talmud study, and then they go to college and they don't have 8 hours a day for Talmud, and that's the only thing they know how to do, that's the only thing that's meaningful, and then, so they'll learn anything. But if they know actually, 20 minutes of reading the weekly Torah portion with Rashi, that's also really meaningful and valuable. And that's also, because if you do study a broader curriculum in yeshiva, then that can sort of empower you to a broader curriculum in life, which is not what you were saying, but that sort of reminds me of that. Sorry for hijacking your comment. It doesn't say anything about quantity. right? Just set time for Torah study. So what does that mean? Now, the Talmud says actually, minimally, if you say the Shema in the morning and the Shema in the evening, you fulfilled your obligation for Torah study. You said 3 paragraphs in the Torah, you've read it, so that's it. The Talmud then says you can't teach this, like don't, what I just said to you, you shouldn't say publicly, because then the Amaratzim, the ignoramuses will think that they're exempt and they won't try to study more. So I'm telling you this because I know you're going to want to do more than that. So that the 3 minutes a day, 3 minutes in the morning, 3 minutes in the evening of Shema could be sufficient, could fulfill your basic obligation, but I imagine more would be better. Next source. The first question asked in the judgment of a man is, have you studied? This is a paraphrase of a passage in the Talmud. And after that, he is asked about other deeds, right? So in the end of, when you stand before, after 120 years, you stand in judgment, the first thing you're asked about is about your study. The sage has stated, let a man always study the Torah, whether for its own sake or not, even if it is not at first for its own sake, the study leads on to that. So that's the notion here, again, from the Talmud. He's introducing the concept of Torah lishma, Torah for its own sake, which is another, I think kind of uniquely, sort of specifically Jewish concept, that it's not about the practical knowledge that's going to be helpful even for your mitzvah observance. It's about somehow self-referential for its own sake, and I think that needs to be unpacked a little bit. So, not for its own sake, so that could be, that's, that Imani's elaborates elsewhere. That could mean, you're studying because you're going to get reward from your parents when you're a child. You're studying because you're going to get reward from your school when you're a little bit older. You're going to study Torah because you're going to get communal honor for being a Torah scholar. Maybe they'll call you Rabbi and give you kavod for get respect for that. That's not lishma. That's not for its own sake. The goal is, but that's okay. Do that. But eventually you should get to a state of lishma. You're doing it for its own sake. Which I think is a kind of amorphous concept. And yet that amorphous concept gets worked into source 3. Okay, source 3. These are the blessings of the Torah. I want to spend some time on these as well. So I just want to read the blessings of Torah. Can someone, I want to sort of note a point out. This is all from the Siddur. So this is in the Siddur. This should be said every morning before, right? Again, Torah study, it's intellectual, it's also religious, so we say a bracha before we do it, but the bracha is kind of unusual. It's different than other brachot that we say before other mitzvot. Someone read source 3, please?
I'll read it.
Thank you, Marilyn.
Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has made us holy through his commandments and has commanded us to engage in the study of the words of Torah. Please, Lord our God, make the words of your Torah sweet in our mouth and in the mouth of your people, the house of Israel, so that we, our descendants, and the descendants of your people, the house of Israel, shall know your name and study your Torah. Blessed are you, Lord, who teaches Torah to his people Israel. Blessed are you, Lord, our God, King of the universe, who has chosen us from all the peoples and given us his Torah. Blessed are you, Lord, giver of the Torah.
Okay, so how many brachot are there?
3.
3. Even though the first and the third start with Baruch, the middle one doesn't start with Baruch because it's sort of comes in the heels of the first one. So for some reason it doesn't start with Baruch. So what are the, so the third one, it's in English, so maybe it's not as familiar. The third one is the bracha that we say when we read Torah in synagogue. Asher bachar banu mikol amim, that's the bracha we say in the synagogue. The first two are only said in the morning, prior to the daily prayers. Can we categorize these blessings? Do we know categories of blessings that these seem similar to? Do we know? Let's sort of first identify. What are categories of blessings we have? We have basically 3 categories of blessings that we say, 3 types of brachot. So the first type of brachot that we have is a brachot mitzvah, brachas that we say over mitzvot. For example, what would be an example of that? Asher kidshan, no, not eating bread. They all say Asher kidshan v'tzitav v'tzivanu, right? The brachot for performing a mitzvah, which is v'tzivanu.
Lulav.
Nitlat lulav. Nitlat yadayim. Lishma kol shofar. Mitzvah tzitzit, right? Hadlik ner shel. Anything, okay, right? Shabbat, Hanukkah, Yom Tov, okay? These are brachot for mitzvah. So we have one of those here too, right? The first one is a classic brachot mitzvah, but it's interesting. What's the bracha? What's the Asher Kidshan Tivanu? Lasok b'divrei Torah, to engage in study of the words of Torah. Lasok, but it's also not just engage like isuk. It's like to busy oneself, to involve oneself. So that's how the mitzvah is defined. That's the bracha. What's the second? What's the next year? We have two other types of brachot in our liturgy. We have brachot ha-nehenin. We have a bracha on benefit. We have a bracha that we say before we benefit from something. What's an example of that? Berei minei v'samim, or hamotzi lechem min haaretz, or berei pri ha'etz. Okay, shahakol. Okay, these are brachot aneni. These are brachot that we say before deriving some benefit from something. So the second paragraph here seems like that. Varevna. It's like a right. And let the words of your Torah be sweet in our mouths, the mouths of your people. Right. It's a bracha. We're saying this bracha because we're anticipating that there's going to be a joyful experience, a pleasurable experience, and so that's what's for. What's the third type of bracha we have? No, bracha. Yeah, or often called. I've always heard it more frequently called bracha shevach. Okay, like a bracha of praise. What's an example of a praise bracha? You see like a lightning, or a beautiful tree, or an unusual looking person, or king, whatever. They're all it's in the Siddur, rainbow, right? They're all these brachot you say when you see things, when you encounter things. That's supposed to inspire you in some way to respond in praise to God. And so that's also that's maybe Asher Bachar Bani B'Kol, right? It's a bracha expressing like this wonderful merit that we have the Torah, to secure our Jewish identity, to anchor our Jewish identity through Torah study. And so we say this praise bracha to God that we have this Torah and a special status as Jews through the Torah. So yeah.
Isn't there an element of bakasha in that second paragraph though? Like, may we and our descendants study Torah in the future. It's not just praise.
It's the second one I said was like birkat nehanin, like it was sort of like shekor.
Right, but it still has that element of
Hamid lamed Torah limo Yisrael. So I saw that more as like, it's more like a shahakol, like a motzi lechem min haaretz. Hamid lamed Torah. Right, it's that God, God gives us bread. He brings forth fruit from the tree, and He teaches Torah to His people Israel. So you're right. You are right. There is a request there as well. It is phrased as a request. Correct. Okay, so some elements again that were sort of what's this radical Jewish idea of Torah study as being, centrality of Talmud Torah in Judaism, centrality of Torah study in Judaism. So you see, that the commandment is phrased as isuk, like lasok b'dvrei Torah, to be involved, engaged, not just reading something, but be really something more captivating than that. 2, it's sweet, it's a benefit, it should be enjoyable, pleasurable, something that sustains us like bread and fruit. And 3, we're praising God in gratitude that we have this special relationship to God, and our Jewish identity is framed around the use of the Torah. Okay. I'm going to move on though, unless anyone has any further comments about source 3. So, Torah lishma, Torah for its own sake, was this idea we saw in Rambam, quoting the Talmud. I mean, all these citations from Maimonides, they could have been passed from the Talmud. Maimonides, I think, sort of is very succinct, so that's why I chose him. But this idea of Torah for its own sake, in contrast of not for its own sake, became very significant in the early years of the Hasidic movement. The Hasidic movement, the Hasidim, said that Torah shelo lishma, Torah for improper motivations, for ulterior motives, was problematic. What's problematic about it? You don't even have to be a chassid to imagine what's problematic about it. It's, you're taking this precious gift from God and using it as a tool for self-aggrandizement, right? Because you get honor. If you're an elite and you have this knowledge, you get power and honor over others. And the Chassidim said, they sort of devalued Torah study in the hierarchy of Jewish values and emphasized in place, mostly prayer, as a more important, in priority or in the hierarchy of sort of Jewish religious, pecking order. And that was done through a critique of Torah study of ulterior motives. Okay, the Chassidic movement emerged in the 18th century. You have the great enemy of the Hasidim was the Vilna Gaon. Vilna Gaon died in around the year 1800. I forget, maybe 1801, 1802, around the year 1800. And he tried to excommunicate the Hasidim and put them in bands, and it wasn't successful. He was a very fierce opponent to the Hasidic movement. His prime and he was very, Vilna Gaon, really amazing person. He had just as an aside, he had no position of communal authority. He was not the rabbi of Vilna. He was not no congregation that employed him. He didn't have a yeshiva. He was just like force of personality and reputation as a scholar, that he became one of the most influential, like people, Jews in Europe in his lifetime. When he dies, his main student, Rechaim of Volozhin, I guess he wasn't yet Rechaim of Volozhin, he went to Volozhin. Rechaim, his student, moved to Volozhin, where he established a yeshiva that was unlike any of the yeshivot that existed prior to that point in Jewish history. Up until 1802, whatever it was, when Volozhin opened, Torah was studied in small batei midrash in local communities, and the rabbi of a community didn't give sermons, the rabbi of a community didn't, whatever, like supervise office staff or anything. The rabbi of the community, inspected chickens, to make sure they were kosher, and answered shilas, and often would have one or two students in the local Beit Midrash. And that's how Torah study was promulgated. Chaim Volozhin felt that Torah study had to be modernized, that old system was not working, that challenges to tradition, as Europe was modernizing, that old system was not sustaining itself. And what was necessary was a large institutional yeshiva that would take students from, across communities, would be supported by philanthropy, and the Volozhin yeshiva was the first modern yeshiva, modern in the sense that it had faculty who earned salaries, with a board of directors, dormitory, kitchens, and students who came from all across Europe. And the Volozhin yeshiva from 1800 until it was closed by the Russians in, I think, 1890, thereabouts, for several generations of leadership, was like the mother of the yeshiva, spawned a whole movement in Lithuania that eventually spread to other communities of these type of yeshivot, some of which still exist today in, the Hebron Yeshiva in Jerusalem, the Mir Yeshiva in Jerusalem and in Brooklyn. These are all descendants of, second generation yeshivot in Lithuania. That was, okay, that's not all he does though. He also felt he had to respond to the Hasidim, already in the 19th century, because the Hasidic movement was so entrenched that he knew he couldn't just ban them. He had to argue against them sort of on their own ground. He had to actually contend with their ideas. And so he wrote a book called Nefesh HaChaim, which is an argument on behalf of Torah study for ulterior motives. Why is it okay? Because to study Torah for no ulterior motives for its own sake, that's the goal of a lifetime. And all of your avodah, all of one's service of God, to do it without ulterior motive, that's you strive for that, I think, over a lifetime of work. But in the meantime, there's still, what do you do? And so this book is in many ways, it's a defense of the anti-Hasidic philosophy, framed in many ways as a defense of Torah study for ulterior motives. And he writes as follows. Each time that a person studies Torah and clings to it properly, the words are as joyous as when they were given at Sinai, as it's written in the Zohar. Come and see that the words of the Torah are holy, exalted, and sweet as it is written in Psalms. More to be desired than gold, even very fine gold, sweeter also than honey and the honeycomb. When he studies Torah, as if he stands each day at Sinai to receive the Torah as it is written. And Moses and the priests of the Levites spoke to all Israel, saying, Take heed and listen, O Israel, this day you have become the people of the Lord your God. We also learn from the Zohar, any individual who is attentive to the words of Torah, he is happy in the world, as if he received the Torah from Sinai. Even from any person, you are obligated to listen to the words of Torah, and when you incline your ears to hear them, you give glory to the Holy King and to the Torah, and that is written, This day you shall become the people of the Lord your God. Continuing, the reason for this is that just as that holy moment of Sinai, it was as if people were attached to the utterance of God, so too now anytime a person studies Torah, he is attached through it to the actual utterance of God, since all Torah was spoken at Sinai, even that which a young student would ask his teacher. Now, when a person is actively engaged with each word, that word itself is actually hewn, as if it is a fiery flame from the mouth of God, and it is considered as if he is receiving it now from Sinai. So a couple of things to unpack here. What do we unpack from there? What do you notice about this? Rachel?
My question is, if this is not Lishma, then what is Lishma? If you don't want to learn Torah because it's the Word of God, and you're supposed to learn it for just Lishma, then where are we going?
Okay, so good. Okay, yeah, Anne.
Yeah, I think his point is just that even if you are learning it for ulterior motives,
It's still
the underlying core is that it's.
I'm learning Torah because I want people to respect me and call me rabbi. But it just so happens, it doesn't matter, because what am I doing? I'm reading these words that are coming from the mouth of God. And so the religion, it sort of works, no matter what my motives are, because the words are definitionally these, this is from God. Even, right, he's quoting the Talmud, even the thing that the student will one day innovate in the future, that also is from Sinai. So it's all from Sinai, it's all from God. So any time anyone opens up a book of Torah and reads it, the voice that comes out of your mouth, that's God's voice speaking. So yeah, it doesn't matter what your motivations are. The words themselves supplant the need for motivation. I think that's the main takeaway that I saw. Yeah.
I think it's somewhat of a separate concept from what he's saying the rest part. But in the first sentence, he actually meant the idea of clinging to it properly, which I think is interesting.
So what does that mean? Yeah, good.
What just makes you happy, so it's fine either way. But what does that mean to cling to it properly? Good.
That's a very good point. That's a good point and a good question. Any other takeaways from this? Yeah.
I don't understand what the Hasidim from that time would find objectionable about.
So I think he's responding to them on their own terms. I think the Hasidim would say, it's all about prayer. The Hasidim emphasize prayer, right? And you think of all the Hasidic stories, it's all about the shepherd boy playing his flute and whatever. It's all, the Hasidic master and ecstatic prayer for hours, talking to God, and that came at the expense of that supplanted a earlier hierarchy, at least in parts of Europe, of scholarship. And so he's saying, no, scholarship actually deserves to be at the peak of this hierarchy because this is what is entailed in this endeavor. Even if you're, right, regardless of what, your motivation.
He's also using very spiritual language.
Yes, he's using very spiritual language, which is, I think, worth noting because I think we sometimes think of, the Hasidim versus their opponents. The Hasidim are spiritual, their opponents are dry and rationalist. He's not he's quoting Zohar, he's quoting mystical concepts. This is very, very mystical. This is not a rationalist perspective. This is a very mystical perspective. It's just mystical about scholarship instead of being mystical about prayer. But I think it's very important. The Misnagdim, the opponents of the Hasidim, certainly Chaim very mystically inclined. Right? I mean, the main text he's quoting is the Zohar. Right? It's a Kabbalistic text. It's just a non-Hasidic, Kabbalistic orientation where Torah study is how we encounter God's voice.
So, but if you took this literally and you applied that as a Chassid, and you decided, okay, I'm going to pick a sentence from Torah, a pasuk somewhere, and I'm going to repeat it over and over again for an hour.
It's like a mantra,
Is that studying Torah? Would that be sufficient? Would this person find that objectionable, or is that?
Yes, that seems to be not what he's talking about, but why not? If the words are God's words, why should it matter? Yeah.
It says that he has to be actively engaged with each word. That seems to be more of an intellectual thing than just reciting it. I don't know.
It's possible.
Was that Marina and then John?
If we go back to Usamani, it's meditate on it.
Vegita bo yomam v'layla, what does that mean? Meditate, does that mean rest? Meditate, again, doesn't seem, I don't think Maimonides means that in the sense of sort of what we would call like a Buddhist style meditation. I think it's more like contemplation, philosophic contemplation, which requires some intellectual connection to the words. I think that, to me, that would part of what makes it work is that it's not just your mouth saying the words, but your brain is but that's to me, I don't know. I mean, what would a chassid say? There's another story. I'll say. Okay, this was once a sermon it was on Shmini Atzeret or Shabbat Chol HaMoed, someday when nobody was interested in hearing a sermon from the rabbi. The rabbi got up and said that there was a big dispute between the Vilna Gaon and the first Lubavitcher Rebbe about this notion of tzimtzum, about God withdrawing into God's self to create space for the universe. And the Chassidim, the Baal Tani says this just didn't really happen. It's just apparent, right? From our perspective, it appears as though God is withdrawing, but not really happening. This is like a Kabbalistic divide between the Hasidic Kabbalah and the non-Hasidic Kabbalah, and why the Hasidim real immanence, God's presence in the world. Okay, which to the Vilna Gaon was heretical and idolatrous, right? Because you're saying that there is no distinction between God and the world. It's pantheism is what they. So my rabbi, when I was a kid, I remember I was in high school. He said he summarized just as I did very briefly this dispute, and said that when he was a child, he wrote a letter to the Lubavitcher Rebbe asking him about this dispute. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe wrote back and said, "You don't understand the Vilna Gaon, and you don't understand the Baal Tanya." And then he wrote to me a longer explanation, which I don't understand. And then he sat down, and that was yeah.
It's the idea whether it is yet another form or a way into the Torah, right?
Say it again. I'm sorry.
It can still be this mantra, this saying the verse, for preparation, perhaps. Right? Because if the mind is
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, you could do. Look, you could do could do jumping jack. You could do whatever you want. I mean, you could have coffee and whatever, and listen to Beethoven. Whatever you could do. I mean, absolutely. There's nothing. It's not about. I am not, and nor is this text condemning or critiquing whatever helps you study better. But I think the point is, Shalom was sort of asking, like, well, if just saying the words is like you're bringing down God's voice and causing God's voice to like be heard in the world because you're saying words of Torah, so I could just say like the words without comprehending it, or I could say the words over and over again, and would that be the same effect? And Tali pointed out, well, no, because somehow the comprehension and the thought it needs to be like part of it, so like it needs to be an element. Yeah.
But it seems like really noteworthy that the cognitive aspect isn't really here at all. It's not about comprehension, it's not about content, it's all affective, it's happy, it's joy, it's debekut, it's all like Hasidic language.
Yeah.
It's clinging, it's you will be God's people,
Yeah.
you will be at Sinai. It's not really about you will understand God's laws, you will follow
Correct.
God's will.
Correct.
It's not bringing God, it's not even about submission to God's will.
Correct.
It's actually not about God's will.
Correct.
It's about
God's
presence.
voice. Yes.
It's about revelation. of
Yes.
presence.
Yes.
So it seems like really like that's the Hasidic, that's how we're
Yeah,
going to
I think this passage, it's sort of like he's kind of responding to them in their own language. I think this is it's a long book with like as many ideas in it. I think this passage, I think that's very true and significant. So some people mentioned joy. I want to see like this source 5. This is the introduction to the Eglei Tal, who writes, I want to mention the opinion of some people who stray from the path of the intellect, say that one who is creative and derives pleasure from the intellectual aspects of Torah study is not learning Lishma, as much as if they were learning straightforwardly, deriving no pleasure, but rather learning only for the sake of the commandment, right? If you do it, and it's like maybe like a caricature of Yeshayahu Leibovitz. So if you're doing it, without enjoyment, and you don't enjoy it, right, and it's just boring for you, but you're just doing it only because this is the Torah and I have to study it, maybe that's best. Whereas if I'm really enjoying it, I'm thinking of all sorts of creative ideas, and I'm writing them down, and I'm sharing them, and like that's somehow tainted because I'm enjoying it too much for it to really be serving God. So they suggest that one who enjoys learning is mixing his own pleasure into learning. Actually, this is a blatant error, for the essence of the commandment to learn Torah is that one be delighted by it. For then it is absorbed into the blood, and one who derives pleasure from Torah becomes attached to it. So this was that to me, it's a beautiful idea that this concept of Lishma that we're circling around is not whatever. It has an effective component that it can be consistent with and should be consistent with enjoyment, and it shouldn't be harmful to who you are as a person. It should be enhancing of who you are as a person, and just be enhancing of your life. Yeah.
It's interesting. I don't know exactly what he's responding to, but it's a very Hasidic concept, or they bring it down a lot. The idea of you have to do everything with simcha. It's a mitzvah to do everything with simcha. So it's interesting that he would be almost arguing, he would be bringing that out that you should be doing this, that they're suggesting you shouldn't be having any pleasure out of it at all. But
yeah, well, look again. I think that the argument would be if you're doing it because you enjoy it, then who are you serving? Why are you doing it? Are you doing it right? I mean, if it's so fun, you sit around the Beit Midrash and you swap ideas. You have a chavruta. I don't know, maybe in the old time Beit Midrash have some snuff, whatever, or smoke pipes, whatever. It's fun, right? So I'm enjoying it. That's good. That is a good thing, right? And so as opposed to being questioning your motivations if you enjoy it too much. So, okay, all right. So the next two sources are longer, and they get at. Well, source 6 comes back to this issue of. Source 6 comes back to the issue of setting aside times. Why do you have to kovei itim? Why do you have to? Thursday mornings for an hour I have a chavruta miss, and Wednesday afternoons I do that. Why is it so important to set aside times? Why isn't it just over the course of the week I read the parsha, whatever. Of course of the week I spend X number of minutes, X number of hours learning Torah. Why is there this emphasis on setting aside times? We saw Maimonides says, right, it's about you have to set aside time for Torah study. And when you're called to judgment, the Talmud is kavita ita, have you set aside times to Torah, have you set aside times to Torah. So source 6 offers an answer to that and gives us a whole other religious framework for understanding Torah. This is one, I think, a really beautiful passage. Joseph Soloveitchik, just as, again, context in sort of what we've been saying, his grandfather was one of the Rosh Yeshiva at the yeshiva in Volozhin before leaving that yeshiva for his own yeshiva in the town of Brisk. Brisk in non-Jewish is called Brest-Litovsk. It's where the treaty that ended World War I on the Eastern Front was signed. The Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, that's Brisk in Jewish, and that's where Reb Chaim Soloveitchik set up his yeshiva after he left the yeshiva of Volozhin. I met somebody who collects antique Judaica. He has an etrog box that's inscribed from the Hanhala, the administration of the yeshiva of Volozhin to Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, in appreciation for your years of service to the yeshiva, and it's an etrog box, silver etrog box inscribed. It's pretty cool. I thought it was pretty cool. So here's what he writes. So this is Justice Soloveitchik, who lived in the 20th century and came to America, and wrote as follows: Talmud Torah is not just acquisition of knowledge, but a personal meeting of the Jew with the Torah. At this level, the Jew cannot just walk into the Beit Midrash unannounced and unexpected and study Torah in his leisure time. As long as the Torah is an object, one can act vis-a-vis an it at random. The scientist opens up the door of his laboratory, walks in, and picks up the test tube. If the Torah, however, is a thou, one must arrange a meeting, make a date with her. Otherwise, she will not wait for him. Let me just say something about scientists, because I wanted to sort of defend the honor of scientists. Stephen Jay Gould, the evolutionary biologist, taught a class at Harvard called The History of Life. It was like a biology for poets kind of class that I took my freshman year at Harvard. I guess it was 3 or 4 years later, he was dying of cancer, and and also teaching that course again. So maybe 3 years, whatever cycle it was, 4 years later, 3 years later, and he arranged to teach double lectures so that he would have time to finish the syllabus before he died. Which, that to me, that's like a Rosh Yeshiva story. That to me, so I think it is. You can. There are examples of scientists who can have a devotion to their teaching, to their students, that can also sort of treat the subject matters of that, right? So I don't want to. Just want to say something for scientists. Okay, but let me move on. But anyway, here the Torah is at date. Okay, it's like again with the gendered, sort of acknowledging the gendered framework. But the Torah is a lady you want to take on a date, so you have to call and make a time. The Jew has a rendezvous with the Torah. Maimonides placed emphasis upon the sanctity of this rendezvous, the significance of keeping the engagement. Now he's quoting the first source we saw. Neither pain, nor hunger, or abject poverty, nor the dreariness and desolation of old age, nor the aggressive excitement of youth can serve as an apology for breaking the engagement with the Torah. If an hour was designated, the appointment made, the meeting arranged, no excuse is good enough to disappoint the Torah. Any delay, no matter how potent the reason was, is a violation of the precept of Ve'agitza bo yomam v'layla, Joshua chapter 1, we saw this earlier, studying Torah day and night. Well, on the subject of excuses, I'll just say, I found this when I taught on campus, that people, if they missed a class a weekly class they would come to, if they missed it, they would often tell me why they had to miss it. It never made me feel better to know the reason. Rabbi, I had to miss because it was the water polo finals, I had to go. Thanks for telling me. That does not make me feel better that you said that. Without fail, it would not, whatever. So anyway, that's me as the teacher. The Torah itself, even the more so, okay? The question arises again, why is it important for the Jew to have an engagement with the Torah? It is self-evident that the halachic emphasis upon a rendezvous with the Torah and the significance of punctuality and promptness in keeping this rendezvous is to be understood as referring to someone else who trails behind the Torah, namely the Shekhinah. God, the Ribono Shel Olam, in this case, disguised as Mother Shekhinah, never separated herself from her daughter, veiled in humble anonymity. She accompanies her daughter princess, the Torah. She's present wherever her princess happens to be. Can one meet the Mother Shekhinah alone without having a date with her daughter? No! Whoever is eager to invite Mother Shekhinah must first set up a meeting with her daughter, the princess. She always accompanies her. She is the princess's mother, the princess's friend, and the princess's chaperone, who does not leave her out of sight. By dating the daughter, one dates the mother as well. Moses, what? Striking, right? Really? I think it's beautiful. It's amazing. It's what? I'm sorry? Moses received the Torah from Sinai. Moshe kibel Torah misinai. The Mishnah does not say the Kadosh Baruch Hu gave the Torah to Moses and Tzani. Why? Because Torah and Shekhinah are inseparable, right? Moses received the Torah, but God didn't give it up, right? So the Shekhinah never divorced herself from the Torah. The latter is still Torah Hashem, her word, her beloved princess. They never parted company. She lets Moses and her chosen community share in the great adventure in the wonderful unitive love affair of Shekhinah and Torah Yisrael. When two sit together and engage in Torah, God, Shekhinah, rests upon them, the Talmud says. The mitzvah of Talmud Torah begins as an intellectual activity which requires exertion, concentration, absorption, a trained logical mind. The aim of this activity is acquisition of knowledge. However, once the activity is initiated, it turns into a great, total experience of meeting Shekhinah, of having a rendezvous with God. The Jew studying Torah is like a traveler who, within sight of the initial goal, stops to take a breath and then continues with new strength upon his endless journey toward an unknown destination. Knowledge alone, at first very much desired, does not satisfy anymore. He is in love with the Shekhinah. In this context, another problem is resolved. Have all Jews an equal share in the Torah, or is the share proportionate to the accomplishment, to the amount of knowledge one possesses? This gets back to the Hasidic critique of, like, the society of learning. On the one hand, we know the singular importance we ascribe to Talmud Torah. On the other hand, we also know what Moses proclaimed. Torah tziva lanu Moshe, Morasha Kilat Yaakov. The whole congregation of Jacob owns the Torah. The scholar and the ignorant have the same rights and prerogatives. The process of learning Torah is both esoteric and exoteric. Right? Esoteric meaning secret and private, and exoteric meaning public. At the esoteric level, the brilliant mind accomplishes more. The dull, less. This cannot be helped. No process of democratization can change the character of education from esoteric into exoteric. There is an aristocracy of the brains, an institution which Congress cannot abolish. An intellectual gesture is esoteric, right? Not everyone is equally smart. However, or knows as much. However, when we come upon the second aspect of Talmud Torah, there is a rendezvous with the Shekhinah. As a meeting with God, the act of Talmud Torah becomes exoteric and completely democratized. So anyway, whether you know a lot, you know a little, you can still study Torah with the best of your ability, with that total engagement, with that, I'm meeting the princess because, the mother is there hovering behind the scenes, right? That, you don't need to know a lot to do that. You just have to know what you know with real sincerity and devotion and be invested in that in a full way. So it's democratic. What do you think of this, the mother coming to the heart? What do you think about that? Sean?
It's just interesting that it's like he's doing the same thing that Chaim Volozhin is doing, but he's speaking to a different audience, a more modern. So he's using different metaphors.
But it's all about connecting to God through Torah study. But you think it's the same idea?
Well, he's appealing to the masses that Torah study is really cool, and so back in the 1800s, it was
the Kabbalistic,
right.
Your mouth is animating the fire of God. And he's saying, no, it's like intimacy. It's about intimate. God's presence is hovering. Yeah. Okay. Any other reactions to the mother Shekhinah accompanying her daughter on a date? Carly?
One thing that comes to my mind, the question that I have for the author here is, what about the low Bashmayim, where the mother's accompanying you on a date? She's probably going to be a helicopter mother, asking everything, asking questions, but the Torah really told low Bashmayim is, it's yours now.
Yeah, right. It's our right. So somehow it's right. If we take responsibility for Torah and we can sort of have autonomy in our interpretation of Torah, how is that possible if the mother is sort of hovering over in the background, peering over her shoulder? How is that possible? Any answer to that?
You gotta get married. You gotta put a ring on it.
Put a ring on it. Get some independence that way. Think that works?
Getting lost in the metaphor.
Getting lost in the metaphor. Okay. Look.
Mothers come to birth.
Right. The mother accompanies her. Right. It's not like, that's maybe the significance, I think, of that it's the mother. It's not like the father. The father is, in heaven. But the mother is that aspect of God that is more imminent and sort of accompanies us is the Shekhinah. So that it's not, that's intentional. It's the element of God that we can sort of experience in a more imminent way as opposed to transcendent, up in heaven's way. So, yeah, I think, those who really emphasize that Lo B'Shamayim, He is not in heaven, and we have ownership. I don't think that means we can. I don't think that means, nor do I think anyone who kind of champions that slogan means to suggest that God's out of the picture and we can do whatever we want with it, and, right? Right, therefore, I know yours. Therefore, whatever it means, or however we use it, like really can be consistent with it's ours, but it's ours, and it connects us to God all the same. Right? How can something, right? That's right. How is it that? Because the type of Torah study that he's advocating, the type of Torah study of the yeshivas, is not like it's not I'm not memorizing Chumash. It's I'm discovering new things about the Torah through like really like sophisticated like conceptual analysis of probably Talmud and Halacha most likely, or Chumash. But I'm discovering something new. The point is chidush. It's new discoveries, new innovations, resolving questions. So it's very creative. It's very personal, like to the mechadesh, the student who's discovering new insights. So how could that be different? No, and yet that somehow in doing that, one still feels that presence of God who like gave us the Torah and accompanies the Torah, like is happy that we're dating her daughter. You know, like that's what we're meant to do. Yeah.
It's kind of striking for me the apropos of the setup, which is what distinguishes Judaism from other religions.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the mother Shekhinah, just Mother Mary. So
the feminine, right? The character that he's describing here is very feminine. Yeah, is that?
and of course it is. I mean, yes, it's Kabbalistic. Yes, it's Hasidic. But I think, I do think the origins of Kabbalah also Mother.
Yeah.
But it also, I think, like the context in which, in Judaism, we go towards mother is interesting to think about, and like just the same thing as the context in which Christianity goes to Mary.
That's interesting,
Like
right?
moments in the history of Christianity where Mary looms larger than other moments.
Correct.
Moments in Judaism where Mother Shekhinah looms larger than
Yes.
Father in
Right.
heaven.
So this is I don't have like I don't have anything close to mastery over Soloveitchik's writings and teachings, but from whatever percentage I've seen, if it's 10% or 20% or 40%, whatever it might be, this is the only passage I'm aware of where he like talks about God in this feminine language that way. It's really fascinating. It's in the context of studying Torah in that way. So let's see. So the next source is another element of Torah study. It's also from Soloveitchik's, right? This is one of my favorite passages of his. Okay, so forgive me. I think it's actually even emotional. Okay, so his father, Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik's father, was Rabbi Moshe Soloveitchik, the son of Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik. Okay, Rabbi Moshe Soloveitchik also was an important teacher. He came to America. Moshe Soloveitchik and his children came to America in the 1930s. But this was when this is a memory from maybe some decades before then. Father's lectures were delivered in my grandfather's parlor, where my bed stood. It was my custom to sit on the bed and listen to my father talk. So he's 10 years old, I don't know, whatever it might be. Okay. He spoke regularly about Maimonides. This is what he did. He would open the Talmud and read the passage. Then he would say something like, this is the explanation of Ri and the Tosafists. Now we'll examine Maimonides to see how he explained the Talmud. Father would regularly find that Maimonides did not explain the Talmud as they did, and that he deviated from the simple approach. My father would say, almost in complaint against Maimonides, I understand neither Maimonides' conceptualization nor his approach to explaining the passage. This is, again, how Talmud was studied in this tradition of the Soloveitchik family. Okay, right? Read some Talmud. What does Maimonides say about it? And how could Maimonides understand the Talmud to derive this bottom line halachic rule? It is as if Father accused Maimonides himself. Our teacher Moses, why did you do this? It would appear, Father continued, that Ravid, who criticized Maimonides, is correct. Members of the group would leap from their seats and each one would propose this idea. Father would listen, then reject their words and say again, the words of our teacher are as hard to understand as iron. Kashek Barzel. Nevertheless, he would not say that we should despair. He would lean his head on his fist and sink deep into thought. The group remained quiet and did not disturb him. Okay, I love the drama. And Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, when he taught himself, his students say, tremendous drama. He did this as well, okay? After a long time, he would lift his head and slowly begin. My friends, let us see. And he started to speak. Sometimes he would speak at length, at other times just a short while. I strained my ears and listened to his words. I understood nothing about the substance of what was said. Nevertheless, a double impression was woven into my young mind. One, Maimonides was surrounded by those who opposed him, enemies who sought to do him harm. Two, the single defender of Maimonides was my father. Without my father, who knows what would happen to Maimonides? I felt as if Maimonides himself were with us in the parlor, listening to Father's words. Maimonides was sitting with me in my bed. What he looked like, I do not know exactly, but his countenance was similar to Father's good and handsome face. He also had the same name as Father, Moses. Father would speak. The students, with eyes fixed upon him, would listen intently to his words. Slowly the tension would dissipate. Father proceeded with power and strength. New concepts came forth. Laws were articulated and formulated with wondrous precision. A new light shined. Problems were resolved and the topic explicated. Maimonides emerged victorious. Father's face shone with great joy. He had defended his friend, Moses, son of Maimon. A smile of contentment appeared on Maimonides' lips. I too joined in the joy. I was bursting with happiness. I would jump from my bed and went quickly to my mother's room with the joyous news. Mother, mother, Maimonides is right. He has overcome the Ravid. Father helped him. How wonderful is Father. But once in a great while, my father did not succeed. And despite all his efforts, the enemies of Maimonides defeated him. Their questions were as strong as iron. Although my father mustered all his strength, he could not save Maimonides from his detractors. Salvation did not come from Maimonides. Deep in thought, my father would lean his head in the palms of his hands on the table. The students and I, and even Maimonides, waited in great tension for my father's words, but my father would raise his head and sadly state, there is no answer. The words of Maimonides are difficult. No one is capable of resolving these questions. The shir ended with no explanation. The students were sad, and even my father was depressed. A sense of despair descended upon all of us. I cried. Even the eyes of Maimonides glistened with teardrops. With a broken heart, I would walk slowly to my mother and cry out to her, Mother, Father cannot answer the Rambam. What will we do? He did not succeed today. And my mother would tell me, don't worry, Father will find an answer to Maimonides. And if he does not succeed, then when you grow up, perhaps you will find an answer to Maimonides. Always remember, my son, the important thing about Torah is to study it with happiness and enthusiasm. This was a childhood experience. Nevertheless, it is not the golden fantasy of a young boy. These feelings are not mystical. It is a past psychological reality which lives even now in the depths of my soul. When I sit and study Talmud, I immediately find myself in a group of the wise men of tradition. The relationship between us is personal. Maimonides is on my right, Rabbeinu Tam is on my left, Rashi sits in front and explains, Rabbeinu Tam asks a question, Maimonides decides the law, and Ravid criticizes. All of them are in my room, sitting around my table. They look at me with love, join with me in conceptualizing and encourage and strengthen me like a father. Learning Torah is not just a didactic, formal, and technical experience whose purpose is the creation, exchange of ideas. Learning Torah is the intense experience of uniting many generations together, the joining of spirit to spirit, and the connecting of soul to soul. Those who transmit the Torah and those who receive the Torah are invited to meet one another at the same historic juncture. So I really love this passage. It introduces another element that we hadn't seen before. Not only is Torah study about animating God's words, as we saw in Nefesh HaChaim, Chaim Volashner, not only is it about, through the joy of the experience, bringing them into ourselves, not only is it about dating, going on a date with the Torah to have that presence of Mother Shekhinah, it's also an effort that unites all the generations of Jews who studied Torah together. So eventually, Rambam was his best friend as a child. I think it's just a powerful picture, and his mother saying, don't worry, maybe you'll grow up and you'll have the answer. It's this unending quest to to find, to figure out, that spans generations to figure out truth, to uncover new meanings. Some years ago, Sarah did a project in the year Sarah learned at Pardes. She did a project on the question of anger in Jewish thought, an independent research project. And Maimonides has a sort of contradiction in his treatment of anger. In one chapter of Hilchot Dev, he says you should never be angry. It's the one he says the golden rule applies to everything, even anger should be right in the middle. And in the next chapter, he says, well, anger is actually an exception. You should never ever be angry. So it's a blatant contradiction. So she came across this in her research. And she spoke to one of our teachers about this, and he said some suggestions, and and all the stuff we saw weren't really, really convincing answers. And he said, don't worry, a contradiction this obvious has to be intentional, and when you discover the answer, it'll be so beautiful that you'll know it's true, right? You won't be in doubt. One day you'll find the answer to this contradiction, and it's just going to be so obviously the answer that. It'll be clear that it's the right one, and it'll all feel good. So she hasn't yet found the answer to that particular contradiction. Okay, but that I think that's part of this. Like it's this uniting of the generation, this quest to understand. I remember after the first year that I studied in yeshiva, I came back to America and started college. And I remember I was doing some independent learning that summer before I started college, and I was reading Maimonides, and I read something and said, this is curious. This seems like a strange formulation, or it doesn't make sense. And then I saw that 600 years ago, 500 years ago, the Kesef Mishnah had asked the same question. And I was like, wow, that's really cool. I read this, and 500 years ago, this was written 800 years ago, and 500 years ago somebody read the same text and asked the same question and provided an answer. So I think that's another element of this. That it's not just about connecting us to God. It's also connecting us as Jews to one another and to Jews of past generations. I think this passage explains really particularly beautiful. Other things about this passage, or about anything so far? We're sort of wrapping up with other. Marilyn?
I worked for the same company for 35 years, and the employees were mostly Christians. And this is, of course, a broad generalization, but the fundamentalist Protestants really knew the Bible, and they could quote it, word for word and everything. And the Catholics were discouraged from reading the Bible on their own, that they should only study with a priest.
So I think the Catholic approach, in some ways, the Protestant approach is more Jewish insofar as every Jew is entitled to have a relationship with Torah, and to on whatever level they're able to comprehend, that's valuable and important and an obligation. On the other hand, we don't believe in the unmediated connection of Torah and the Jew as being certainly not normative. You would never derive legal what do I do? How do I keep Shabbat? How do I what do I eat? How do I live my life? You would never derive that, or Jew would not tend to derive that from an unmediated look at the Torah. We have thousands of years. We have the oral Torah, and we have thousands of years of interpretive history and precedent that guide us as well. When the printing press was invented, Jews loved the print. I tell this to the kids I learned to study with for the bar mitzvah preparation. The Jews embraced the printing press and a disproportionate number of books that were printed were Hebrew books in the early centuries of printing. The first Hebrew book that was printed, I believe, was Chumash with Rashi. You're nodding. 1475. Thank you. Okay, great.
So now we've got dates.
Okay. All right, this is your time period. Okay. 1475. The first Hebrew book, Chumash with Rashi. No Jew printed a Tanakh without Rashi until the 20th century. It was the Korean Publishing, their Tanakh, was the first Tanakh printed without Rashi under Jewish auspices, and it was done in the 1950s. So they felt, okay, maybe there is a value in seeing Tanakh just without anything else, and maybe that does give rise to some new types of creative Torah scholarship. But I think that just shows that we are in that sense we're a little more Catholic, that we don't just because we're part of this tradition, because we invite Rashi and Rambam and Rabbi Tam around the table to study with us, to meet each other in that conversation that spans generations. We don't have a Protestant sola scriptura, just me and my Bible. That's all I need, and I can make my own religion that way. That I don't think is a Jewish approach, even though we do believe that every Jew is entitled to have that personal encounter to Torah. So we're a little bit of both. I think it's 9 o'clock. I want to respect everyone's time. There are snacks outside. I'm going to putt around a little bit, so happy to have follow-up conversations as I putter. Thank you so much for coming.